To this point, we have examined how the human mind responds to uncertainty, why ambiguity captures attention, and why unresolved situations continue demanding psychological energy. Cognitive psychology explains why the brain searches for answers, why incomplete information remains active, and why uncertainty creates mental tension. But cognitive psychology alone does not fully explain one of the most confusing aspects of emotionally intense relationships: why someone can continue to feel psychologically present long after the relationship has ended. Why can a single message, a brief interaction, or even the possibility of contact suddenly reactivate emotions that seem to have disappeared? To answer this question, we have to move beyond thoughts and behaviors and examine the internal structures created through relationships themselves. This brings us to object relations theory, one of the most influential traditions within psychoanalytic psychology. Object relations theory begins with a simple but powerful idea. Human beings do not only have relationships with people externally, they also build internal psychological representations of those relationships. These internal representations, often called internal objects, become part of the architecture of the personality. They influence how people understand connection, rejection, love, conflict, and separation. An internal object is not simply a memory of another person. It is an emotional structure made from experiences, expectations, feelings, and meanings attached to that relationship. The mind does not store relationships like photographs. It stores them as psychological patterns that can become activated again when something reminds us of the original experience. This is why someone can leave physically while remaining psychologically present. The foundations of object relations theory developed through thinkers such as Melanie Klein, who examined how early emotional experiences become internalized during development. Klein proposed that the mind organizes experiences with important caregivers into internal structures that later influence how people interpret relationships. Donald Winnicott expanded this by explaining how early caregiving environments shape the developing self and the ability to recognize others as separate individuals with their own internal worlds. W.R.D. Fabian argued that human beings are fundamentally object-seeking, meaning relationships themselves become central organizing forces in psychological life. From this perspective, relationships do not simply happen around us. They become part of the internal structure through which we experience reality. This explains why emotional separation is often more complicated than physical separation. When a relationship ends, the external interaction may stop, but the internal relationship may continue. People replay conversations, imagine different outcomes, analyze past events, and mentally return to moments that feel unresolved. The mind continues attempting to organize the experience into something understandable. This does not happen because someone is weak or irrational. It happens because emotionally significant relationships become integrated into the person's psychological world. This concept becomes especially important when examining pathological narcissism. Otto Kernberg applied object relations theory to narcissistic personality organization and argued that narcissistic patterns often involve difficulties integrating both positive and negative aspects of the self and others into a stable whole. Healthy relationships require the ability to see another person as complex. Someone can be loving and frustrating, supportive and disappointing, valuable and imperfect at the same time. This capacity is known as whole object relations. It allows a person to maintain a stable understanding of others even during conflict. When this integration becomes impaired, the mind may rely on splitting. Splitting is a psychological defense where experiences are divided into extremes because complexity becomes difficult to tolerate. A person may be idealized when they provide admiration, validation, or emotional security, then become devalued when they create disappointment, challenge, or threaten the person's self-image. The problem is not simply that feelings change. The deeper issue is difficulty maintaining a complete representation of the same person across different emotional states. The other individual is no longer experienced as a whole person, but through the role they serve at a particular moment. This helps explain why relationships involving narcissistic patterns can become organized around function rather than mutual recognition. The other person may become psychologically important because they provide something essential to emotional regulation. Do they confirm identity? Do they provide admiration? Do they reduce insecurity? Do they protect against shame or feelings of inadequacy? In this structure, the relationship is not only about connection. It also becomes a mechanism for maintaining internal stability. This is where narcissistic supply becomes important. Narcissistic supply is often described simply as attention, but psychologically it represents something deeper: external regulation of the self. Admiration, emotional reactions, validation, or even conflict can become sources of psychological stimulation that temporarily reinforce identity and self-worth. The person is not valued only for who they are, but also for the emotional function they provide. This does not mean every behavior is consciously planned or intentionally manipulative. Human behavior is complex, and motivations often operate at both conscious and unconscious levels. However, within narcissistic patterns, relationships may become heavily connected to regulating the self rather than creating mutual emotional exchange. Heinz Kohut approached narcissism from another perspective through self-psychology and introduced the concept of self-objects. Kohut described how other people can become psychologically involved in maintaining a person's sense of self. In healthy development, these functions gradually become internalized. A person develops the ability to regulate emotions, maintain confidence, and recover from disappointment without constantly depending on outside sources. But when this process remains incomplete, the individual may continue seeking external experiences to stabilize identity. The other person becomes significant not only because of who they are, but because of what they represent psychologically. This provides a deeper explanation for narcissistic hoovering. Hoovering is often viewed only as an attempt to reconnect, but object relations theory suggests a more complex process. Contact may function as a way of reactivating an existing internal relationship structure. The message itself may be simple: a question, a memory, a vague apology, a statement of missing someone, but psychologically, the impact comes from everything attached to that person. The recipient is not responding only to the present interaction. They are responding to the entire emotional history connected to that relationship. This is why ambiguous contact can feel unusually powerful. The emotional intensity does not come from the message alone. It comes from the activation of the internal object. The brain does not experience the contact as an isolated event. It connects the present moment with previous experiences, expectations, hopes, disappointments, and unresolved questions. The relationship becomes psychologically active again. Ambiguity is especially powerful because it creates activation without resolution. A clear ending allows the mind to reorganize around a new reality. A clear apology combined with consistent behavioral change provides information that can be processed. A direct ending provides a painful but understandable conclusion. Ambiguous communication provides neither. It brings the relationship back into awareness while leaving the mind without enough information to create closure. The result is psychological suspension. The person feels present but unavailable. The relationship feels active but incomplete. The mind begins searching again. What did they mean? Did they change? Did they actually care? Could things have been different? The uncertainty keeps the internal object alive because the mind continues trying to resolve something that has not been resolved. This is why physical distance alone does not always remove emotional influence. Someone can disappear from daily life while remaining active within another person's internal world. The relationship continues because the psychological representation continues. The person no longer needs physical access because the internal object carries the connection forward. This returns us to the central idea of weaponized ambiguity. Its power does not come only from the words used or the action taken. Its power comes from activating systems that already exist within the human mind. People naturally maintain internal representations of meaningful relationships. They naturally search for coherence when those relationships become uncertain. They naturally attempt to resolve contradictions when emotionally important experiences remain incomplete. Ambiguous hoovering takes advantage of these normal psychological processes by creating renewed activation without providing the clarity required for integration. Object relations theory therefore changes how we understand why someone can continue to feel psychologically connected long after a relationship ends. The influence does not exist only in the moment of contact. The deeper process occurs inside the internal world, where the relationship continues to be processed. The narcissist does not need to occupy the same physical space because the internal object keeps the relationship psychologically active. The next question becomes, if object relations explains why a relationship can remain active internally, why do some people experience this activation much more intensely than others? To understand that, we must examine attachment theory and the role of the attachment system in responding to uncertainty, inconsistency, and emotional loss. Now let's take a look at attachment theory and why ambiguity feels like hope. In the previous section, we examined how object relations theory explains why relationships can continue internally even after external contact ends. The mind does not simply erase emotionally significant people. It creates internal representations that continue influencing thoughts, emotions, and expectations. But this creates another important question. Why do some people experience the return of that internal relationship as extremely powerful, while others are able to detach more easily? Why can the smallest sign of contact create a wave of emotion, hope, and renewed attention? To understand this, we must examine the attachment system itself, the psychological and biological mechanism responsible for regulating connection, separation, and the fear of losing important relationships. Attachment theory begins with a simple but fundamental idea. Human beings are wired for connection. Throughout human evolution, maintaining closeness with important others was not merely an emotional preference. It was connected to survival. An infant who remained close to a caregiver was more likely to receive protection, nourishment, and safety. Because of this, the human nervous system developed an attachment system designed to monitor the availability of important relationships. It constantly evaluates signals of closeness, distance, acceptance, and rejection. When connection feels secure, the attachment system becomes calm. When connection feels threatened or uncertain, the system activates and begins searching for resolution. The foundation of modern attachment theory comes from John Bowlby, who argued that attachment is not simply a learned behavior or emotional habit. It is a fundamental psychological system that motivates people to seek proximity and security from important others. Bowlby proposed that early attachment experiences create what he called internal working models, mental frameworks that influence how people interpret relationships throughout life. These internal models shape expectations about love, trust, abandonment, and emotional safety. They influence questions that are often outside conscious awareness. Will someone be there when I need them? Can I depend on another person? Am I worthy of being chosen? Is closeness safe or dangerous? These ideas connect directly with object relations theory. Object relations explains how relationships become internalized as psychological structures. Attachment theory explains how those structures influence expectations and emotional responses. Together, they show that people do not enter relationships as blank slates. They enter relationships carrying previous emotional experiences that shape how they interpret closeness and separation. A person is not only responding to what is happening in the present moment, they are also responding through the lens of everything their attachment system has learned before. The work of Mary Ainsworth expanded attachment theory through her research on infant-caregiver relationships. Her studies demonstrated that children develop different patterns of responding depending on how consistently and reliably their caregivers respond to their emotional needs. These patterns became known as attachment styles: secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. These styles are not permanent identities or simple labels. They are adaptive strategies developed by the attachment system in response to relational experiences. Secure attachment develops when relationships are generally experienced as reliable and emotionally available. The person learns that closeness does not require constant fear or monitoring. They can experience separation without assuming abandonment. They can experience conflict without believing the relationship is automatically destroyed. Their internal model of relationships is built around the expectation that connection can exist alongside independence. Anxious attachment develops when emotional availability feels inconsistent. The person experiences moments of closeness, but also uncertainty about whether that connection will remain. Because the attachment system cannot predict when connection will be available, it becomes highly sensitive to changes in communication, emotional tone, and signs of withdrawal. The person may become focused on restoring closeness because uncertainty itself becomes emotionally threatening. Avoidant attachment develops when emotional needs are repeatedly dismissed, ignored, or discouraged. The person may learn that depending on others creates disappointment, so they protect themselves by minimizing emotional needs and creating distance. Disorganized attachment involves conflicting attachment responses, where the person may experience closeness as both desirable and threatening, creating difficulty organizing a stable response to intimacy. These patterns become especially relevant when examining relationships built around inconsistency and ambiguity. One of the strongest principles in attachment psychology is that unpredictability increases attachment activation. When someone is consistently available, the nervous system receives a clear message: this relationship is stable. When someone is consistently unavailable, the nervous system eventually receives another clear message: this connection is not available. But when someone repeatedly moves between closeness and distance, the attachment system remains uncertain. The mind begins searching. What does this mean? Are they coming back? Did something change? Was the connection real? The uncertainty itself becomes the focus. This is why inconsistent emotional availability can become so difficult to disengage from. The problem is not only the loss of the person. The problem is the attachment system remaining activated without receiving a clear answer. The brain continues monitoring because it has not received enough information to determine whether the relationship is safe, lost, or recoverable. This is where trauma bonding is often discussed. Although the term is frequently used broadly, the psychological mechanism involves strong emotional attachment developing under conditions of stress, inconsistency, and alternating emotional reward and distress. When moments of connection are unpredictable, the nervous system can become highly focused on restoring those moments. Relief becomes attached to the same source that created the uncertainty. The person is not only remembering the pain, they are also remembering the moments when the pain temporarily stopped. This creates one of the most confusing experiences in unstable relationships, mistaking intensity for intimacy. A relationship can feel extremely powerful because the attachment system is constantly activated. Strong emotional reactions do not always indicate a deep or healthy bond. Sometimes they indicate that the nervous system is repeatedly attempting to restore a sense of security. This helps explain why ambiguous contact can feel like hope. The attachment system is designed to preserve connection, not to objectively evaluate whether that connection is beneficial. When someone returns, even briefly, the nervous system may interpret that return as a sign that connection is possible again. A message becomes a possibility, a memory becomes a sign, a small gesture becomes evidence that things may change. The attachment system searches for information that reduces uncertainty, but uncertainty reduction is not the same thing as relationship repair. The attachment system asks, is connection available again? It does not automatically ask, is this relationship healthy? This distinction is critical because the emotional relief created by renewed contact can be mistaken for genuine progress. The return of communication can calm the nervous system temporarily while leaving the deeper relational pattern unchanged. This is why hope can survive even after evidence disappears. A person may not only be attached to what the relationship currently is. They may be attached to what the relationship represented, what it could have become, or what they continue hoping will finally be resolved. The mind holds on to the possibility because possibility feels safer than accepting final loss. This connects back to internal working models. People often interpret present relationships through the expectations created by previous experiences. Someone who has learned that love is inconsistent may become especially sensitive to relationships that recreate that pattern because the emotional environment feels familiar. But familiarity does not always mean safety. The nervous system often moves toward what it recognizes, even when what it recognizes is painful. Attachment theory, therefore, adds another layer to understanding narcissistic hoovering. Object relations explains why a person can remain psychologically present through internal representations. Attachment theory explains why renewed contact can create such a powerful emotional reaction. The ambiguity does not simply bring back memories. It activates the attachment system's search for safety, connection, and resolution. But attachment activation alone does not explain why the mind can become trapped in cycles of waiting, analyzing, and anticipating the next signal. To understand why unpredictable attention becomes so reinforcing, why one message can create days or weeks of mental focus, and why uncertainty itself can become addictive, we must examine behavioral psychology and the science of intermittent reinforcement. Now we go into behavioral psychology and why ambiguity becomes addictive. In the previous sections, we examined how object relations theory explains why relationships can continue internally after separation, and how attachment theory explains why uncertainty can activate powerful emotional responses. But another question remains: why does the mind continue returning to the same person, the same memories, and the same unanswered questions even when the relationship itself may no longer provide stability or security? Why can one interaction create days or weeks of mental focus? Why can inconsistent attention become more psychologically powerful than consistent attention? To understand this process, we must examine behavioral psychology and the mechanisms of learning, reinforcement, and prediction that shape human behavior. Behavioral psychology focuses on how behaviors are strengthened or weakened through consequences. One of the most influential figures in this field was B.F. Skinner, who studied how organisms learn through reinforcement. Skinner demonstrated that behaviors followed by rewarding outcomes become more likely to occur again because the brain associates the behavior with the possibility of receiving a desired result. Although these principles were first studied through observable behaviors, they also apply to complex emotional patterns, including relationship dynamics. Human beings learn not only through direct experiences, but also through emotional reinforcement, anticipation, and repeated patterns of connection and withdrawal. One of the most important discoveries in behavioral psychology is that unpredictable rewards can create stronger and more persistent behavior than predictable rewards. When a reward appears consistently, the brain learns the pattern and eventually adjusts. When a reward never appears, the behavior often decreases because there is no expectation of success. But when rewards appear unpredictably, the brain continues searching because the possibility of receiving the reward remains open. This is known as variable reinforcement, and it is one of the strongest mechanisms for maintaining persistent behavior. This principle is especially relevant to ambiguous relationship dynamics. When someone alternates between emotional availability and distance, affection and withdrawal, communication and silence, the brain receives inconsistent information. The relationship becomes unpredictable. The person does not know when connection will return, but because connection has returned before, the possibility remains psychologically active. The mind continues monitoring for the next signal because the previous pattern has taught it that another rewarding interaction may happen. This creates a powerful cycle of anticipation. The emotional focus is not produced only by the amount of attention received, but by the uncertainty surrounding when that attention will appear again. A consistently unavailable person creates a clear reality. A consistently available person creates security. But someone who repeatedly moves between closeness and distance creates a condition where the brain remains engaged, because it is constantly attempting to predict what will happen next. This connects to the concept of reward prediction error, a process studied in neuroscience and behavioral psychology. The brain is constantly making predictions about future events. When reality matches expectations, the system remains relatively stable. However, when reality differs from expectations, the brain produces a stronger response because something unexpected has occurred. A person who expects rejection but receives affection experiences a powerful shift. A person who expects connection but receives silence also experiences a powerful shift. Unexpected outcomes become highly significant because the brain uses them to update its understanding of the environment. This explains why a small interaction can sometimes create a much larger psychological response than the interaction itself would appear to justify. The message is not powerful only because of its content. It is powerful because it activates a prediction system that is attempting to determine what the event means and what may happen next. The mind begins analyzing because uncertainty creates a demand for explanation. The person may replay conversations, examine wording, search for hidden meaning, and imagine possible outcomes because the brain is attempting to reduce uncertainty and improve future prediction. This process is closely connected to rumination. Rumination is not simply thinking about something repeatedly. It is the mind continuing to process information because it has not reached a satisfying conclusion. When an emotionally important situation remains unresolved, the brain continues returning to it because it is attempting to create a complete understanding of what happened. Ambiguous contact keeps this process active because it introduces new information without providing enough clarity to reorganize the entire situation. Behavioral psychology therefore helps explain why ambiguity can become self-sustaining. The individual is not necessarily attached only to the person. They may become attached to the cycle of anticipation itself. The possibility of a future reward keeps attention engaged because the brain has learned that uncertainty may eventually lead to emotional relief. This does not mean the person is experiencing addiction in the same way as substance dependence. A more accurate explanation is that the nervous system has learned a reinforcement pattern where unpredictable outcomes maintain attention and behavior. This distinction is important because the emotional attachment is not always based on the reality of the relationship. It can become connected to possibility. The brain is naturally designed to predict the future, and when information is incomplete, it fills gaps with expectations and imagined outcomes. A person may begin relating not only to who someone currently is, but also to who they hope that person might become. The uncertainty allows that possibility to remain alive because there is no definitive information forcing the mind to update its expectations. This is why ambiguous hoovering can maintain psychological influence even with very little contact. The pattern does not require constant interaction. Once the reinforcement history exists, even a small reminder can reactivate the learned response. The brain recognizes the possibility of reward and begins searching again. The power comes from the pattern that has been established over time, not simply from the individual event. When we combine behavioral psychology with the theories discussed earlier, a larger picture emerges. Cognitive psychology explains why uncertainty captures attention. Object relations theory explains why emotionally significant people become internal psychological structures. Attachment theory explains why threatened connection activates powerful emotional responses. Behavioral psychology explains why unpredictable reinforcement keeps the mind engaged and searching. Together, these systems explain why ambiguity can become so powerful. It does not create attachment from nothing. It activates systems that already exist within the human mind. The brain seeks understanding. The attachment system seeks connection. Internal representations preserve emotional relationships, and reinforcement learning encourages continued attention toward uncertain outcomes. Ambiguity becomes powerful because it keeps all of these systems active without providing the resolution necessary for the mind to settle. Understanding this mechanism changes the way we view hoovering. The influence is not contained only in the message, the timing, or the behavior itself. The deeper process occurs through the interaction between the external event and the psychological systems already operating inside the individual. The final question is not simply why someone reaches out. The deeper question is why the mind continues responding and why certain patterns remain active even after the relationship has changed. To fully understand the complete cycle, we must now integrate cognitive psychology, object relations theory, attachment theory, and behavioral learning into one unified model that explains how these systems interact within real relationship dynamics.